Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, Justin Trudeau was asked a question about Donald Trump, and he took an extended leave, a full 20-second pause. And I think that it was interesting because, without the news spin, I started laughing, halfway through. After about 10 seconds, without the timer, because I didn't know what I was watching yet, I was like, no. He's still thinking, because you have to order your thoughts. But you should be prepped for most questions, and certainly you should be prepped for a question on what's happening down south if you're the prime minister, leader of Canada, right? And so, taking the amount of time that he took looked funny to me. He looked unprepared. He looked like he was out of his depth. He looked scared. But here's the tweet, right? Michael Boyer, and Michael is a national correspondent reporting for CTV. He says, "The power of the pause." Justin Trudeau responds to real Donald Trump decision to threaten military action against protesters. I think it's interesting that they're calling them protesters. I think that's, and I made this point. I released Speaking Moistly yesterday with Greg. It was very fun. We talked about this too, but I think that this is important. I'm going to share it again. But we talked about how neither one of us thought that this was a powerful moment, and without the press, I don't know that the Canadian citizenship would come out and say, yeah, he looked super strong here. What do you think? Here we go.
Reluctant to comment on the words and actions of the U.S. president. But we do have Donald Trump now calling for military action against protesters. We saw protesters tear gas yesterday to make way for a presidential photo op. I'd like to ask you what you think about that. And if you don't want to comment, what message do you think you're sending?
We all watch in horror and consternation what's going on in the United States. It is a time to pull people together, but it is...
And he's pulling from the speech that he used when he was talking about George Floyd originally, right? Horror and consternation, right? Those were the same. As soon as he said those words, I thought I was just rehashing that, because I didn't take that as a strong pause. 21 seconds isn't a strong... 6 seconds makes your point, right? Like a strong 6-second pause, you've ordered your thoughts, you know what you're going to say, you lay it out, right? And if you don't know what you're going to say, or you're finding your notes, sometimes people will fumble, people will, Justin. But 21 seconds of just doesn't... It doesn't seem powerful to me. It doesn't seem, oh, that's like Churchill addressing, Stalin or whatever. It just seems, no, right? I don't believe the media spin not on this. And I didn't like the 20-second pause. I didn't like the rehashing of the George Floyd speech. Weak. Didn't look good. This is CBC News, and this is posted June 2nd. Today is June 3rd. It says, Trump or no Trump, Canada's relationship with the U.S. isn't going back to normal soon. This is under politics, and this is another positioning. For 21 seconds on Tuesday morning, Justin Trudeau said nothing. Between the end of a reporter's question about Donald Trump and the start of the Prime Minister's response, there was a long, tense silence. Anyone could have filled that... Well, I'm not going to read it all. But again, they're positioning it as strength, right? They're not letting his silence speak for itself. Here's another one, CTV News, and this is, again, June 2nd, but this is on the racism tour de force. They're not letting up on this, and it's interesting. The headlines for coronavirus disappeared when the riots in the United States started, and then people started looting in Montreal for no reason, because we don't have the number of deaths in Canada for police brutality. We don't have even close to the same statistics as the United States. I saw protests starting in France as well, with a very weak excuse for the protests to start, but they said it was a killing from 4 years ago, and so they're going to start now because, right, George Floyd, we've got to do this. It seems coordinated. It seems disingenuous, and I think that's what the main point is. Anyway, the Prime Minister, who dressed in blackface so many times he can't remember how many, says Prime Minister Trudeau called to go beyond pretty words on racism in Canada. I thought this was notable just because they use the weakness. Remember, probably you watch Game of Thrones. Tyrion Lannister says, "Wrap whatever your weakness is, like wrap yourself in it, and then they can't hurt you with it." Right? They did that with the pause, and they're doing that with the response to the racism. Right? Like he doesn't have the moral authority to do this because he dressed in blackface so many times that he can't remember. But he's lecturing Canadians on racism, and this is what they think gives him the moral authority. And this is why I'm highlighting this. Trudeau led off the series of speeches with an acknowledgement of anti-black racism in Canada and his own past shortcomings, which included wearing blackface on more occasions than he could correctly say. When it comes to being an ally, quote, when it comes to being an ally, I have made serious mistakes in the past, mistakes which I deeply regret and continue to learn from. I'm not perfect, but not being perfect is not a free pass to not do the right thing, Trudeau said. I know that for so many people listening right now, the last thing you want to hear is another speech on racism from a white politician. Look at the race baiting, right? Like, I don't want to hear a speech lecturing Canadians on racism from any politician, white, Asian, Indian, Somali. It doesn't matter. I don't care what color or what creed or whatever you say the hashtag or the hash after your Canadianism is. I don't care. I don't want to hear a lecture on racism from that person. Least of all Justin Trudeau, because it's not believable. Because all of those politicians are pledging fealty to Justin Trudeau, who is a hypocrite of the highest order, right? And thinking that you can wrap yourself in it and say, yeah, I did that. I made mistakes 20 years ago when he was an adult, right? And I learned from those mistakes. That's not good enough for a lot of people. Jimmy Fallon, right? Dressed in blackface on SNL 20 years ago, and the mob regularly comes for him, right? And there are many other people who have not fared nearly as well as Jimmy Fallon, but who have had lives destroyed for wrong think in past decades, right? A 2009 tweet justifies canceling whoever, right? I can't remember the exact 2009 tweet, but there was a 2009 tweet and somebody in 2019 was like, really now? Like, Jimmy, what's his name? Not Kimmel. The other late night. Maybe it is Kimmel. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't watch the late night people. But, they all went through that era of comedy together, right? And they all did all of those things, and the cancel culture comes for them, and they mea culpa and say, well, and then other people of lesser stature, right, get destroyed for the same thing. So it's very, I don't believe it, right? Like it's the pretty words, right? That's all it is. Quote, I know from so many people listening right now, the last thing you want to hear is another speech on racism from a white politician. Yeah. Adding that the reason that he was delivering his speech was to make it clear that the government is listening. Yeah, right. Trudeau said that Canadians who are standing up in this moment and all who have, quote, felt the weight of oppression deserve better, committing to working with the opposition parties on eradicating racism in Canada. What a ridiculously improbable goal. Like, if you say I'm going to lose 150 pounds and you're 160 pounds, it doesn't make any sense, right? And eradicating racism, like, are you going to eradicate racism like the war on drugs eradicated illegal drug use? Oh, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to legislate racism away? Or are you going to ban it through an order in council? Is that what you're going to do? We're going to eradicate racism, everybody. Hashtag, if you're not with us, you're against us, right? We'll just lock everybody in their homes if they disagree. No problem. This is a simple solution, everyone, right? It's just ridiculous. Speaking of order in council, here is MP Motz, and MP Motz is asking Minister Blair, why do you guys keep adding to the gun ban? Why do you keep changing the regulations, etc.? And basically what's happened is the order in council allowed the RCMP to reclassify weapons as they interpret from their understanding from the order in council. And so the RCMP keep adding weapons because they fall under the classification rules set by the Trudeau government. And Mr. Blair is doing the Liberal tap dance to avoid answering the questions in a way that is truthful. Well, I'm sure he's not trying to be, well, who knows what he's trying to be. But Mr. Motz frequently says that's not true and moves on and moves on. I've got a news article to back up Mr. Motz's statements that the things that the government is saying is not true are true. And, well, we'll listen to this for about a minute, I think. It's a 5-minute video clip, but it's worth listening to. Here we go.
Minister of Public Safety, Minister Blair, how many times has the list of banned firearms changed since May 1st? The Honourable Minister.
And my understanding is that an order in council was made on May 1st, and we have not made any changes to that order in council.
Mr. Motz.
That's untrue. How many more firearms have been added to the original prohibited list since that date?
I think
The Honourable Minister.
I suspect the member may be referring to the work that the RCMP has been doing through the Canadian Firearms Program in order to apply the order in council that was passed.
Mr. Motz, I want to ask all the honourable members to make sure that they're on mute. We're getting some voices in the background. Mr. Motz, please continue.
How many 22 caliber rifles and firearms are on that ban list?
The Honourable Minister.
Just to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, the ban list includes a number of assault rifles, including the AR-15, and I think the member may be referring to a weapon that the RCMP has identified as using an AR-15 frame, which of course...
Go back to Mr. Motz.
Again, wrong answer, Chair. How many shotguns are now on that ban list?
The Honourable Minister.
Yeah, this is a bit of confusion that was put out by the gun lobby to frighten hunters, and in fact, we did not prohibit any shotguns.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Mr. Blair is saying we did not prohibit any shotguns. However, this article disproves that, but he also said that that was a little bit of misinformation put out by the gun lobby. So he's blaming an entire lobby, not anybody specifically, just a whole lobby, of putting out misinformation. Here's the article from the National Post. Liberal gun ban quietly expanded, potentially putting owners unknowingly on the wrong side of the law. The RCMP has quietly outlawed hundreds of rifles and shotguns over the past month, adding to the list of 1,500 firearms already banned by the Liberal government on May 1st. The list has been expanded without public notifications from either the RCMP or the federal government, raising concerns among gun sellers and owners that they could have unknowingly bought, sold, or transported illegal firearms in recent weeks. The recent banned firearms have all been deemed illegal retroactively as of May 1st. The new list also includes a number of single-shot and semi-automatic shotguns and at least one Russian-made pump-action, despite repeated claims from Public Safety Minister Bill Blair that Ottawa's sweeping ban would not include guns used for bird hunting. The RCMP did not respond to questions about how many firearms it has added retroactively to its firearms reference table, FRT. Since the beginning of May, the FRT serves as the official reference for what firearms are illegal under Canadian law. The RCMP designates the firearms as legal or illegal based on its interpretation of Ottawa's regulations, which were updated on May 1st in an effort to ban military platform. They're not even using quotes. Military platform rifles like AR-15 and AR-10. A data set compiled by the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association, CSAAA, shared with the National Post, suggested that at least 320 rifles and shotguns had been added to the original list of 1,500. The National Post independently verified 2,000 of the firearms included in the list, all of which appeared in the updated FRT, but not in Ottawa's initial order in council. I scroll down a bit. The RCMP's updated list, however, does outlaw a number of 4-gauge shotguns under the 20mm provision, including the Weebly and Scott Wild foul gun, a bird hunting firearm, the single-shot duck gun made by W.W. Greener, an English manufacturer, and the obscure Russian-made TOZ, among others. A number of other 12-gauge semi-automatic shotguns are now prohibited under the FRT. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau justified the ban by saying it targets firearms designed to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. Recent updates to the ban include some Western-style single-shot shotguns that need to be loaded one at a time, as well as high-caliber rifles used for the explicit purpose of killing a single target at a long range. Okay, so is the National Post lying? Right? Did Jesse Snyder just make it all up? Or is Bill Blair lying when he said that we haven't banned any shotguns? Right? Here's another one. Defense Department accused of using pandemic to withhold information from Parliament. Shocking, right? Shocking. No, never exploit a crisis, right? Never use a crisis to your advantage or to cover up the answers to uncomfortable questions. The Department of National Defense stands accused of trying to take advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic to withhold information from Parliament and Canadians. There's been widespread concern about federal departments failing to respond to access to information requests since the crisis first started in earnest in March, but the opposition Conservatives say the problem is much worse at the Defense Department. By far, national defense is the worst offender, said Conservative defense critic James Beeson. There seems to be a systemic breakdown in being transparent in the department, or there's intentional disregard for what Canadians have been requesting. The allegation stems from the department's failure in recent months to respond to a large number of questions on the order paper, which are one of the primary means for members of parliament to get information about the inner workings of the federal departments. Departments have 45 days to respond to order paper questions. I scroll down. Quote, during the unprecedented COVID-19 situation, public servants are required to work remotely and have limited access to the tools and files requested, the department wrote in response to a recent request by Conservative MP Leanne Rood. Sorry if I got that wrong. I scroll down. The Defense Department acknowledged it has failed to respond to 17 order paper questions in April and May and was unable to provide the information that Giroux asked to see about the planned defense spending, citing COVID-19 as the reason. Quote, work on the request the PBO referred to has in fact been impacted by the COVID-19 given the requirements for our analysts to work from secure systems inaccessible from home, Defense Department spokesperson Daniel Le Bothier. Bothier. I'm going to go with Bothier, said in an email. It's awful. I know I can't say names. I apologize. He went on to blame personnel having limited access to certain records and databases and key military staff being tasked with supporting the government's COVID-19 response for not responding to the order paper question. Beeson, nonetheless, I scroll down, accused the government and department of failing to provide information to Canadians and parliamentarians whose job is to hold the government to account. Quote, at the beginning of the pandemic, I would say they had the right to make those decisions, he said, but we're getting to a point now that this has become a government and Minister Sajjan in particular stonewalling the accountability aspect of his role. Very interesting, right? Very interesting. Okay, a couple of quick stories to finish us off today. Bell, TELUS pick European suppliers for 5G network, leaving Huawei role unclear. That's interesting. Rogers was already using Ericsson to build their 5G network, so it's notable. Bell initially was buying Huawei switches and things, but now Bell is following Rogers' lead and building with Ericsson. So very interesting. That's just a quick headline I wanted to read for you guys. And here's the last little bit. CTV News. This is published June 3rd. Trudeau positions Canada as a champion of coordinated global recovery plan. He's spent $252 billion in the past 7 weeks for this, and he wants to run the world. Global recovery plan? Maybe let's focus on fixing our own country before we start telling the world what to do. Right? I really believe that. And I really feel like Justin Trudeau is not worried about that from his cottage. Back to this. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will continue today to make the case for a coordinated global response to cushion the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the world's poorest countries. He'll be among the leaders and heads of state to deliver remarks during a virtual summit of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. Among other things, he is expected to promise that Canada will partner with developing countries which stand to be the hardest hit by the pandemic and help to rally the world behind measures like debt relief to help them survive the crisis. Yeah, I mean, if there's something that Justin Trudeau is very, very good at, it's racking up debt, right? Unbelievable. That's where we're headed. That's what Justin Trudeau is going to do today. I don't think that posting black squares on Twitter and Instagram fixes racism. I don't think that virtue signaling on the world stage and throwing money at nations that are directed by places like the UN or people who are not the people of Canada, I don't think that's appropriate, especially when we're at least $250 billion in the hole. We're borrowing to send money overseas. We have situations where veterans are waiting to get help. We have situations where there are homeless in our cities and being put up by tax dollars in hotels under the claim that will help them with COVID-19. But we have safe injection sites and people being driven there using taxpayer dollars. I don't know that this solves the problem. I think this exacerbates the problem. I think it makes it worse. I don't think it solves anything. I think it's problematic. I think our response is wrong. I think that Justin Trudeau pretending to the world that going into debt is the only way to solve the COVID-19 crisis and then leading on that on the world stage at conferences, I don't think that's smart. I don't think that shows smart leadership from the UN or from Canada or from the Canadian MPs. I think that the fact that we're at a reduced parliament, we're at a situation where we can't provide reports, we can't accurately look at even gun laws having a situation where, well, the end of the gun article, which I didn't get to, talks about, well, which I didn't highlight, talks about how it was so poorly thought out that the impact to business is changing like daily. One of the business owners said like 22% of my stock is unsellable, and that changes like daily, and it keeps going up. Like how am I supposed to do business in this environment? And yet Justin Trudeau and the news and the global leaders say this is exactly how we've got to do it. We've got to coordinate. We've got to do this together. Everybody together, completely ignoring the people on the ground, completely ignoring the structure of our government, completely ignoring the way we've traditionally handled crises in the past, right? The government sat all through the world wars, and Justin Trudeau's government hides in his cottage altogether, popping out once a day like a cuckoo clock to spend money, goes to virtual conferences and spends money on the world stage because they're the hardest hit, and ignores the very real, very visceral problems in Canada. We have municipalities that are out revenue streams. We have municipalities that are putting up homeless people in hotels because of COVID-19. We have a drug situation that has killed more in my city than COVID-19. And what do we do about that? That's not a crisis to shut down the economy for. It's just interesting, the priorities of our governments. It's just interesting and insulting a lot of the time where the focus is, especially when they decide that the most important thing after giving taxpayer dollars to bolster a coordinated global recovery plan, they're going to virtue signal and tell us that we're racist, right? I just think that it's completely tone deaf to have the government spend valuable time in the House of Commons dedicating to speeches about racism when we have some real crises going on, self-created crises, but real crises going on that's not being addressed during that time, right? And like I said, the government owns the legislative calendar. They get to set what the priorities are. So the government gets to decide what's talked about in the House of Commons, and they want to talk about racism. You have to wonder why. You have to wonder why that's the focus. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. I recorded one yesterday with Greg, and it was fun. And we talked about racism, and I probably said things that I shouldn't say because whatever. Like, this is a conversation. It's supposed to be an authentic conversation. And maybe people get things wrong. Maybe we don't. I don't know. I never claim to be 100% right. I'm just willing to have the conversation, and I'm willing to take a position. And I think that, and I don't think that my position is all that crazy. And I don't think that it's harmful. So anyway, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.